He was turning to ash, a lethal poison eroding his immortal veins. Gasping for breath on the icy hospital bed, he whispered, "Whoever marries you will be a very lucky woman." Without missing a beat, Evelyn slid a silver band onto his freezing finger and replied, "I accept your proposal." Then the real nightmare began. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass of Columbia Memorial Hospital in Astoria, Oregon, like handfuls of gravel. It was 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the dead center of the graveyard shift, when the emergency room doors crashed open. Evelyn Mercer, a 28-year-old senior attending physician with shadows under her eyes that rivaled the stormy night, looked up from her charting. Paramedic John Davies was shouting over the chaos his uniform soaked. "John Doe, found him in the alley behind 14th Street. No ID core temp is registering at 68 degrees. Heart rate is, Doc, the monitor says 10 beats per minute, but that has to be a malfunction." Evelyn rushed forward, her medical instincts kicking in. As she helped transfer the patient onto the trauma bay bed, her hands brushed his bare forearm. She gasped. It wasn't just cold. It was like touching a block of marble left out in a winter storm. The man was breathtakingly striking sharp jawline raven hair, clinging to a pale forehead, and veins that pulsed with a faint, unnatural, dark luminescence beneath his translucent skin. "Get him on a warming blanket, start a central line, and push warmed IV fluids," Evelyn ordered, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. "Dr. Holden, get the crash cart ready." Dr. Aris Holden, a resident with a habit of panicking, struggled to find a vein. "His tissue is too dense, Dr. Mercer. The needle won't penetrate properly. And look at his blood." When Evelyn finally managed to draw a sample, she froze. The liquid in the vial wasn't the bright crimson of oxygenated arterial blood, nor the deep burgundy of venous blood. It was almost black, viscous, and separated immediately into strange, shimmering layers. Leaving Holden to manage the warming protocols, Evelyn took the vial to the small, dimly lit hematology lab on the floor. She placed a drop under the microscope and switched on the slide light. What she saw defied every medical textbook she had ever memorized. The cellular structures were rapidly regenerating, only to be violently torn apart by a foreign crystalline substance acting like a microscopic buzzsaw. Out of pure curiosity, she passed a UV sterilization wand over the sample. The blood violently hissed, emitting a tiny wisp of smoke. Evelyn backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a woman of science, a pragmatic doctor, who paid her mortgage and worried about her car's transmission. Monsters were the stuff of cheap paperback novels, yet the evidence lay right under her lens. When she returned to Trauma Bay, 4 Holden was gone, called away to a multi-car pile-up on the interstate. The room was deathly quiet, save for the rhythmic, agonizingly slow beep of the heart monitor. The John Doe's eyes were open. They were a piercing, iridescent amber. The warming blankets are agonizing. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp that resonated in Evelyn's chest. "Please, turn them off." Evelyn hesitated, then reached over and powered down the bear hugger system. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Or rather, what are you? A bitter, exhausted smile touched his pale lips. "My name is Dominic Adler, and I am an antiquity. A dying one at that." Over the next 2 hours, the frantic pace of the ER bypassed room 4. Evelyn found herself pulled into Dominic's orbit. He explained with a detached sort of grief that he had been injected with a synthetic, heavy metal isotope liquid, silver-bound with a radioactive tracer. It was a targeted assassination. The isotope was systematically destroying his cellular regeneration. His immortal body was essentially attacking itself, turning his insides to ash. "Why come to a human hospital?" Evelyn asked, adjusting his IV, replacing the saline with a specialized cocktail of chelating agents, she desperately hoped would slow the heavy metal poisoning. "I didn't," Dominic murmured, coughing. A fleck of black ash landed on his pale lip. "I was trying to reach the docks. I miscalculated. Now I will die in sterile white sheets, listening to the fluorescent lights hum." Despite the absurdity, the terrifying reality of the situation, Evelyn felt a profound wave of empathy. Beneath the terrifying exterior of an apex predator was a man in excruciating pain, facing the end of a very long existence, entirely alone. She stayed by his side, bringing him a rare privacy in the bustling hospital. She spoke to him to keep him grounded, telling him about her grueling medical residency, her massive student debt, and her quiet life in Astoria. In return, Dominic spoke of the 1890s of jazz clubs in the roaring 20s, and the crushing weight of outliving everyone he had ever loved. As the clock struck 5 a.m., a violent tremor racked Dominic's body. His skin began to crack, faint webs of grey appearing along his neck. The pain was blinding him. Evelyn grabbed his hand, squeezing it tightly, ignoring the freezing temperature. He looked up at her, his amber eyes dimming, but filled with a sudden, profound tenderness. She had not screamed. She had not called the authorities. She had merely tried to heal him. "You are extraordinary, Dr. Mercer." Dominic gasped, his breath hitching. He forced a faint, admiring smile through the agony. "Whoever marries you will be a very lucky woman." Evelyn looked at the monitors then, down at his decaying hand. A crazy, desperate, and calculated thought crystallized in her mind. "I accept your proposal," she said flatly. Dominic's eyes widened, the shock temporarily overpowering his pain. "What?" Evelyn reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a plain silver band she wore on a chain around her neck, her late mother's ring. She slid it off the chain and forced it onto Dominic's freezing pinky finger, the only one it would fit. "I said I accept," Evelyn repeated, her gaze locking onto his. "We're getting married. Right now." Dominic stared at the silver ring, the metal slightly burning his skin, though it was nothing compared to the isotope ravaging his veins. "Evelyn, this is madness. I am turning to dust. I will be gone before the sun crests the horizon." "Exactly," Evelyn said, her tone shifting from a compassionate caregiver to a sharply focused tactician. She turned to the computer station in the corner of the room, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "You told me earlier about the Adler Trust. You mentioned that the man who poisoned you, Victor Hastings, stands to inherit your entire estate, your properties and your archives, because he is your only remaining blood-sworn sire. Is that true?" Dominic nodded weakly, coughing up another trace of ash. "Vampiric law. The oldest surviving lineage claims the estate of the fallen. Hastings poisoned me to claim my empire in Seattle. He wants my political leverage. My death makes him untouchable. Unless," Evelyn countered, printing a series of documents from the hospital's legal database, "you have a legal human spouse. Under United States federal and state law, a spouse overrides a distant biological or blood-sworn relative, especially if a swift will is executed. If your assets are bound in human shell corporations, as you said, their human law dictates the inheritance." Dominic let out a breathless, hollow laugh. "You want my fortune? I want the Hastings pharmaceutical front dismantled," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper as she approached his bed, slamming the papers onto the tray table. "Victor Hastings owns Apex Biotech. They are the ones who hiked the price of the leukemia drug my sister needed to survive last year. They priced her out of life. She died 3 months ago. If marrying a dying vampire gives me the keys to Hastings' empire and the power to liquidate his entire life's work, then yes, Dominic, I am going to be a very lucky woman." Dominic looked at the fierce, beautiful human before him. She wasn't just a merciful angel. She was an avenging fury. The irony was utterly poetic. Hastings had sought to take everything, and by driving Dominic into this random ER, he had unwittingly handed his empire to his own victim's sister. You understand the danger. Dominic warned, his vision beginning to blur as the grey cracks spread up his jawline. Hastings will hunt you. He will know what you have done. Let him try to fight the IRS, the SEC, and a battery of probate lawyers, Evelyn said grimly. I'll bury his company in so much legal red tape he'll wish he was dead. Now sign the marriage license. In Oregon, a hospital chaplain can solemnize a marriage in extremis without a waiting period. Evelyn paged Chaplain Thomas Miller. A sleepy, kind-faced man in his 60s arrived at room 4B 10 minutes later. He took one look at Dominic's ghastly pallor and the frantic beeping of the monitor, and assumed the young man was succumbing to a terminal illness. We need to do this quickly, Thomas, Evelyn said, holding Dominic's icy hand. The ceremony was surreal. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sterile shadows across the trauma bay. There were no flowers, no music, only the smell of antiseptic and the terrifying sound of Dominic's laboured breathing. Do you, Evelyn, take this man? I do, she said firmly, her eyes fixed on Dominic. And do you, Dominic, take this woman? I do, Dominic rasped, coughing violently. He barely managed to scrawl his signature on the hospital's emergency legal marriage and will forms binding his vast, centuries-old empire to Evelyn Mercer. Chaplain Miller pronounced them husband and wife, gave a sympathetic nod, and rushed out to file the paperwork with the county clerk's digital portal before the patient expired. The moment the door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A deafening silence fell over the trauma bay. Evelyn stood by the bed, the reality of what she had just done crashing over her. She was a widow in waiting to a creature of myth. It is done, Dominic whispered. His body was visibly deteriorating now, the skin flaking away into fine, dark dust that caught the harsh light. Take the ring. Go to Elias Thorne in Seattle. He is a human lawyer. He knows everything. He will protect you. Evelyn watched him fade, a sudden, unexpected pang of grief striking her chest. He had been a monster, perhaps, but tonight he was just a casualty of a war she was now intimately part of. Thank you, Dominic, she whispered softly. Before Dominic could speak his final words, the double doors of the emergency room down the hall blew off their hinges with a deafening crash. The sound of terrified screams and shattering glass echoed through the corridor. Evelyn looked through the small glass window of room 4B. Striding down the hallway was a man in a tailored charcoal suit. His eyes glowed a vibrant, unnatural red, and the security guards who tried to stop him were thrown aside like rag dolls. Victor Hastings had not waited for Dominic to die. He had come to finish the job. Dominic's hand gripped Evelyn's wrist with surprising, desperate strength. Run! He gasped, his amber eyes wide with terror. Evelyn, run! But Evelyn didn't run. She calmly reached under her hospital scrubs, her fingers wrapping around the cold, heavy handle of a modified, silver-plated tactical firearm she had carried every day since her sister's death. She looked down at her dying husband. Till death do us part, Dominic, she said, coldly cocking the weapon. And I don't plan on dying tonight. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the sterile corridors of Columbia Memorial Hospital, deafening and absolute. Victor Hastings had barely registered the human doctor standing over his prey before a .45 caliber hollow point bullet, hand-cast in pure silver, tore through his tailored charcoal suit and buried itself in his left shoulder. Victor staggered back, a hiss of pure, feral agony escaping his lips. The wound smoked the silver, instantly reacting with the volatile chemistry of his immortal blood. He looked up, his glowing red eyes wide with genuine shock. Mortals were supposed to run. They were supposed to cower. They were certainly not supposed to return fire. "Get out of my emergency room," Evelyn commanded, her voice devoid of panic. Her hands, trained to perform delicate procedures under immense pressure, did not shake as she aimed the weapon at his chest. "You insolent little insect!" Victor snarled, his fangs extending as the veins around his eyes darkened into jagged black lightning bolts. He lunged forward, moving with a speed that blurred the air. But Evelyn was a trauma surgeon. She lived in the split-second margins between life and death. Before Victor reached the threshold of room 4B, she fired twice more, striking him in the abdomen, then swiftly turned and slammed her hand onto the emergency oxygen release valve on the wall. A highly pressurized stream of pure oxygen flooded the immediate space. She grabbed the UV sterilization wand she had brought from the lab, sparked a surgical cauterizing pen, and threw it into the oxygen-rich corridor. The resulting flashfire explosion blew Victor backward through the double doors, engulfing him in a localized inferno of bright blue flame. The sprinkler system shrieked to life, raining cold water down upon the ruined hallway. "Dominic, we are leaving." Evelyn coughed through the smoke, holstering her weapon. She turned to the bed. Dominic was barely conscious, his skin entirely grey, the heavy metal isotope nearing his heart. "I cannot walk." Dominic rasped the ashes of his own body, dusting the white sheets. "Leave me, Evelyn. You have the ring. You have the power. I am a doctor, and you are my patient. And as of 5 minutes ago, you are my husband. I don't abandon either," Evelyn stated flatly. She grabbed a portable defibrillator, a heavy-duty transport gurney, and 3 bags of the collating IV fluids. With a surge of adrenaline she didn't know she possessed, she hauled Dominic's freezing, rigid body onto the gurney. Navigating through the chaotic, waterlogged hospital, Evelyn bypassed the main corridors and took the freight elevator down to the ambulance bay. The chaos upstairs had drawn all security personnel away. An advanced life support ambulance sat idling near the loading dock, the keys dangling from the ignition. Evelyn loaded Dominic into the back, secured the stretcher, and slammed the door shut. She jumped into the driver's seat, threw the heavy vehicle into gear, and peeled out into the stormy Oregon night, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. As they sped down Interstate 5 toward Seattle, the rain washing away the blood on the windshield, Evelyn yelled into the back, "Dominic, stay with me. Tell me about Apex Biotech. If we are going to dismantle Victor's empire, I need to know where the bodies are buried." From the back, Dominic's voice was a weak, echoing whisper over the siren wail. "Apex is a farming operation. The drugs they produce for leukemia, for autoimmune diseases, they don't cure. They alter the blood. They make human blood richer, more potent for feeding. They hike the prices to force desperation, pushing patients into clinical trials where they vanish. Your sister, she was a candidate." Evelyn's grip on the steering wheel tightened until her knuckles turned white. The grief that had hollowed her out for the past 3 months transmuted instantly into a cold, diamond-hard rage. It hadn't been a failing medical system that killed Abigail. It had been a calculated harvest. "We need to reach Elias Crawford in Seattle." Dominic coughed, struggling to keep his amber eyes open. "He holds the master ledger. He is human, but his family has served the Adler Trust for a century. He can execute the marriage documents. Lock Victor out of the accounts." "Hold on, Dominic," Evelyn whispered, pressing the accelerator to the floor. "I'm going to fix this. All of it." During the 2-hour drive, Evelyn frequently reached into the back to push more collating agents into Dominic's IV. She noticed something miraculous. While the heavy metals were destroying his vampiric cells, the sheer volume of synthetic human fluids she was pumping into him was creating a temporary buffer. The decay hadn't stopped, but it had slowed. By the time the Seattle skyline appeared through the breaking storm clouds, dawn was threatening to break. They pulled into the underground parking garage of a nondescript brutalist high-rise in the financial district. Elias Crawford, a sharply dressed man in his 50s with calculating grey eyes, was waiting for them. He had tracked the ambulance's GPS the moment Evelyn had used Dominic's emergency burner phone to call ahead. When he saw Evelyn wheeling a decaying, ashen Dominic out of the ambulance, his stoic demeanour cracked. "Good God, Mr. Adler!" Elias breathed, rushing forward to help push the gurney toward a private reinforced elevator. "Elias!" Evelyn interrupted, her voice snapping like a whip. "Did you receive the digital transmission from the hospital chaplain?" Elias looked at the blood-stained, exhausted doctor, noticing the silver ring on her finger. "I did, Mrs. Adler. The marriage is legally binding. The will is activated. But Victor Hastings has already frozen the secondary accounts. He has sent mercenaries. We have less than an hour before he tracks your vehicle here." "Then we don't have an hour to hide," Evelyn said, wheeling Dominic into the high-tech medical suite hidden within Elias's penthouse. She looked down at her dying husband, then back to the lawyer. "We execute the hostile takeover right now, and I am going to prepare a very special prescription for Mr. Hastings." The penthouse was a towering fortress of reinforced steel and ballistic glass, suspended high above the waking city of Seattle. Inside the hidden medical suite, the sterile scent of antiseptic masked the metallic tang of immortal blood. Evelyn Mercer moved with a mechanical, terrifying precision. The storm had broken outside, and the first pale, bruised light of dawn was threatening to spill over the Cascade Mountains. She drew a fresh vial of blood from Dominic's unresponsive arm. The liquid was no longer blood. It was a sludgy, shimmering nightmare of decaying cells and volatile silver. The liquid isotope had almost entirely consumed his cellular structure. He was minutes, perhaps seconds away from turning into pure ash on the steel examination table. But Evelyn was a woman of science, and science was about manipulating reactions. She carried the vial to Elias's state-of-the-art centrifuge, locking it into the rotor. She didn't want to extract the poison to save Dominic. It was far too deeply integrated into his tissues for a simple dialysis. Instead, she needed to isolate the reaction. If Victor Hastings shared a similar immortal physiology, the heavy metal isotope would be highly contagious, provided it was introduced directly and aggressively into his bloodstream. "Elias!" Evelyn called out, her voice cutting through the hum of the medical machinery. Her eyes were glued to the digital readout of the centrifuge. "Transfer all of Apex Biotech's liquid assets to the Adler Trust Shell Corporations. Do it immediately. Leave him with absolutely nothing." In the adjacent living room, Elias Crawford's fingers flew across a massive, glowing terminal. "I'm initiating the hostile probate protocols now," the lawyer shouted back, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Because you are the legally recognized human spouse, state law triggers an automatic injunction against Victor's blood-sworn claims. The offshore banks are locking him out. His security access codes to the pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities are being systematically revoked and reassigned to you as we speak." "He's going to feel that," Evelyn muttered. The centrifuge dinged. She extracted the vial, now separated into layers. Using a micropipette, she drew up the hyperconcentrated, isolated silver isotope and loaded it into a large-gauge medical syringe, mixing it with a heavy dose of synthetic heparin, a potent blood thinner. "He already has, oh," a smooth, venomous voice echoed through the sprawling apartment. The sound of shattering ballistic glass was deafening. Evelyn whipped around to see the reinforced balcony doors cave inward. Victor Hastings stepped into the room. He was a vision of bespoke wealth and horrific violence. The left side of his face was heavily blistered and charred from the hospital explosion, his tailored suit hanging in blackened tatters, but the horrific burns were already knitting together, with unnatural, sickening speed. Behind him, 3 heavily armed human mercenaries filed into the penthouse, leveling suppressed assault rifles directly at Elias's chest. "You have been a profound, irritating nuisance, Dr. Mercer," Victor sneered, stepping gracefully over the shards of shattered glass. "A clever little stunt with the hospital chaplain and the marriage license. But human laws only matter to those who intend to leave survivors. Kill the lawyer. Bring the grieving doctor to me." Before the mercenaries could even flinch to pull their triggers, Evelyn slammed her hand onto a red emergency button mounted on the medical bay wall. Thick, heavy steel blast doors dropped from the ceiling with a pneumatic hiss, slamming shut and locking Elias safely on the outside with the heavily armed men. Evelyn had intentionally trapped Victor inside the impenetrable soundproof medical room with her and the dying Dominic. Victor laughed, a cruel, echoing sound that vibrated in Evelyn's chest. "You locked yourself in the cage with the wolf, Doctor. Did you really think freezing my bank accounts would save your life? I have walked this earth for 400 years. Money is merely a tool. Blood is the only true power." "I agree," Evelyn said softly. She stood perfectly still beside Dominic's bed, her hands resting calmly at her sides. Victor lunged. He moved faster than the human eye could track, pinning Evelyn against the cold steel wall in the blink of an eye. His hand wrapped around her throat, lifting her inches off the tiled floor. The sheer crushing force of his grip threatened to snap her cervical spine. "Your sister had wonderfully sweet blood," Victor whispered, his elongated fangs grazing the sensitive skin beneath Evelyn's ear. "I drained Abigail myself when she couldn't pay for the treatments my company withheld. Now I will drain you, and I will take back what is mine." Victor sank his fangs deep into the juncture of Evelyn's neck and shoulder. He expected the hot, intoxicating rush of human terror and rich iron. Instead, the moment his fangs pierced her flesh and drew her blood into his mouth, Victor let out a blood-curdling scream. He violently tore himself away from her, stumbling backward and collapsing onto his knees. He clutched his throat, his glowing red eyes wide with absolute blinding agony. Jagged pitch-black veins instantly webbed across his face, creeping up from his collar, up to his temples. Evelyn slid down the wall gasping for air, clutching the bleeding, burning puncture wound on her neck. She looked down at Victor, who was thrashing violently on the pristine white tiles, his immortal body already beginning to flake into dry, grey ash. "What did you do to me?" Victor choked out, coughing up thick clouds of black dust. "Before you broke the glass," Evelyn wheezed, applying heavy pressure to her bleeding neck. "I injected myself with that massive dose of synthetic heparin combined with the isolated silver isotope I extracted from my husband. It's lethal to your kind. I turned my own cardiovascular system into a highly pressurized, poisoned well. And you just drank from it." Victor Hastings, the architect of a pharmaceutical empire built entirely on human suffering and exploitation, reached a trembling, decaying hand toward her. But the isotope worked 10 times faster in his aggressive, predatory system. Within seconds his body completely calcified. With a sickening crunch, he crumbled into a pile of lifeless, dark grey ash. Evelyn didn't waste a second celebrating. She grabbed a second massive syringe from the surgical tray, a dangerous, untested cocktail of human stem cells, heavy metal binders, and pure epinephrine, and plunged it directly through Dominic's ribs, straight into his failing heart. "Come back," she whispered, fiercely, pressing her bloody hands against his cold chest. "I didn't do all of this to be a widow on my first day. Come back to me." For a terrifying, agonizing minute, the monitors remained flat. There was nothing but the sound of the storm outside. Then Dominic's chest heaved, his amber eyes snapped open, glowing with a renewed fierce light. The grey cracks on his skin halted, and slowly, miraculously, The fresh human stem cells forced his immortal regeneration to kickstart, purging the last of the poison from his veins. Dominic slowly turned his head, looking at the pile of ash on the floor, then up at Evelyn. She was bleeding, bruised utterly, exhausted, and fiercely beautiful in the morning light. "You killed him." Dominic breathed genuine awe and reverence in his raspy voice. "No." Evelyn corrected a tired but triumphant smile touching her lips as she showed him the silver ring still gleaming on her finger. "We liquidated his assets. Now, husband, we have a pharmaceutical company to tear down, and a whole lot of patients to cure. Tour." Evelyn Mercer thought her life ended when she lost her sister, but stepping into the dark, hidden world of vampires gave her the ultimate power to fight back. Sometimes the most dangerous predator in the room isn't the monster, it's a doctor, with nothing to lose and everything to avenge. If you were hooked by Evelyn and Dominic's deadly romance and ruthless revenge, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling, dark romances. What would you do in Evelyn's shoes? Let us know in the comments.